I recommend not selling yourself, but kind of providing that advice that we've been talking about, where you can give some free tips or share some of your experience or your knowledge or anything that you think the audience can benefit from. Definitely share it. And that in turn helps to build up your credibility.
Get ready to build, protect, and sell your expertise online with the Online Genius Podcast. You'll laugh. We hope you won't cry, but you'll always be informed and prepared so you can have the success you want. Here's your host, Bobby Klink.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of the Online Genius Podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Klink, and I'm really excited for today's show because we're going to be talking about an area that every online entrepreneur needs to think about, and that's social media. And we're going to talk about how to create an overall strategy, but also we're going to talk about some nitty-gritty details about the different areas of social media that are worthwhile for entrepreneurs to focus on. And luckily, you're not going to have to listen to me talk about that, because who wants to listen to a lawyer talk about social media? Instead, you're going to be hearing from today's guest expert, who is Ashley Mason. Now, Ashley is a social media consultant for women entrepreneurs. She runs a business called Dash of Social, and through both social media management and consulting, she helps women entrepreneurs to create and execute social media strategies that attract their dream clients, make their names known in their industry, and build an engaged community. She's worked with women in various industries, including finance, media, beauty, health and wellness, and more. And so she has quite a bit of experience and quite a bit of information to share with you today. Welcome to the podcast, Ashley.
Hey, Bobby. Thanks for having me.
You know, I'm excited to talk about social media and get kind of your expertise on that. But before I do, I want to talk a little bit about your journey, because it's a bit different than I think most people's journey. And that's because you actually started with online entrepreneurship when you were in high school. Is that right?
Yes, I did. I was a senior in high school.
I mean, I think you'd actually started a blog before that, and that's kind of what led you on the path to online entrepreneurship. Is that kind of the story? And if so, kind of why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was a sophomore in high school, I started a fashion and lifestyle blog called Lily and Lemons. So I focused really on a bunch of school tips for studying and also some outfits that I wore and just kind of what was going on with my life. And I actually grew that blog organically through social media itself. And as that blog started to grow, I started to partner with more and more smaller companies to review their products, just kind of help them out with sponsored content and all of that stuff. And then once it grew, I started to realize that most of these small companies either didn't have a social media presence or they barely had one. So that's when I kind of started to play around with the idea of helping these companies out, because most of them just didn't really have the resources to do it on their own. So once I started to work with these companies on creating a strategy and managing their social media and basically just showing them how to do it, that's kind of when I really started to branch out on my own and started doing freelancing until I established Dash of Social officially last year.
Now, Ashley, I got to ask you, what in the world's wrong with you? I mean, when I was a sophomore to a senior in high school, the last thing I was thinking about was business. I mean, I guess what actually made you kind of, or compelled you to really start thinking about those things so early in life?
So I've always been interested in owning a business. It's funny because ever since I was little, I always kind of pretended I would own a business. So it wasn't really a surprise to me or my family and friends when I actually kind of established one. I guess I've always kind of been ambitious and really have liked the idea of working for myself instead of working for someone else. So I thought there's no better time to start than now. And it was better to start earlier rather than trying to figure it out later on in life.
Well, I think it definitely is great advice to get started earlier. I'm quite impressed. I got to be honest, because I didn't have, even though I had entrepreneurial parents, a father who owned a business, I didn't ever think about starting my own business that early. And so I think it's quite impressive that you did. But now let's get down to kind of the actual advice for the listeners. What I want to start with is asking you kind of a broad question of what role do you think social media is best suited to play for entrepreneurs in their business?
So I personally think it's not necessarily meant for selling. I think it's for building brand awareness. So one thing that people really tend to get confused is that they think that social media should be used solely to sell to their target market. And although that's one of the benefits of social media, which is that it makes it super easy to sell your products or services, I personally believe in a really holistic aspect part of it, and the fact that establishing brand awareness and showing your target market who you are and building those long-term relationships with them, because it's the relationships that end up translating into those sales.
So you kind of think that it's plays a key role in tribe building, as we say, and maybe in marketing, but kind of sales should be a secondary or kind of maybe even third or fourth level goal for social media.
Absolutely. Because I always tell my clients that people do business with people that they know, like, and trust. And through social media, with getting that brand awareness and building those relationships, that's how people get to know, like, and trust you. So that's why I really focus on that huge, I guess, reason for why you should be on social media is to kind of connect with your target market rather than trying to push those hard sales to them.
Well, so here's, I think, a question that a lot of people ask themselves. If you're going to use social media not for sales, how do you judge effectiveness, right? If you're selling, it's pretty easy. You can figure out whether you're getting a return on investment, but it's a bit harder if you're using it for brand awareness and general marketing. So how does an entrepreneur go about deciding whether their strategy is working?
So I always say not to focus on the numbers. And so many people are always caught up in seeing how many likes their photo has or how many followers they're getting on each account. And although those are really great things to see whether or not your content is working and the strategy itself, I really like to focus on the people aspect. So you want to see if people are commenting on your posts, if people are messaging you, if people are resonating with the content that you're putting out there. I really focus on kind of making sure that people are engaging with it and really interested in what you have to say, rather than if you're getting all those huge amount of followers, because it's really kind of the human interaction that is most important.
Well, so let's talk about that for a second. If we're not going to focus on numbers or hard numbers, what's a reasonable goal when you're developing a plan to say, okay, well, here's where here's where I am today. Where do I want to be in 6 months? How would you go about setting some kind of goal that you could measure whether you succeeded or not, if you're not going to look at likes and things like that?
So instead of focusing on likes or follows, I kind of recommend focusing on consistency. So I know one thing that a lot of people tend to struggle with is being consistent on social media. They'll tend to write a bunch of posts at once and they're feeling inspiration, but then a few weeks go by and they realize that they haven't put anything out. So the goals that I like to focus on and suggest that my clients follow the same is maybe set a goal of making sure to have 1 Instagram post up per day, or having 3 posts up on Facebook per week, or posting on Twitter every single day. Just kind of setting those types of goals rather than reaching 5,000 followers by the end of the month, I guess, is more actionable. And those goals that you set for yourself of being consistent with your social media will end up translating into, I guess, the number goals down the line if that's something that you really want to pursue.
Actually, I think that's great advice. And I think a lot of people think that a goal to be actionable or to fit with the SMART goal framework that they've hear about is, well, they think they have to be thinking of a result. And I think actually habit goals are very effective. And one of the things I always like to say is just do the work. And if you do the work, good things will follow. So I'm glad that you're giving that same kind of advice with social media.
Yes, absolutely. And especially because one thing that I find is that when people really focus on getting a certain follower amount, they end up getting what I call ghost followers. So they'll really only care about the empty followers who are just kind of those spam accounts or fake accounts, or people who are just following you to get that follow back. So when you start focusing less on the followers that you're getting and more on the content that you're putting out there and how often you're putting it out, you'll find that you're getting much more valuable followers who are actually engaging with your content rather than just trying to get that follow back from you. And that is the type of follower you want to get, rather than just those people who aren't even going to be interested in your content at all.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. But let me push on that a bit, because so I have a couple of businesses. I have my law firm business, Clink LLC, and then I started this Your Online Genius business separately. And I started that 3 or 4 months ago and launched the Facebook page. And I felt like, and I'd always heard the advice, don't ever pay for likes. Don't do a likes campaign. That's a waste of money. But I sat there saying, well, who's going to like my page or follow me or start engaging if I have 0 likes? So I mean, is there something to, or is there a need to kind of get an initial number of people on, whether it's by advertising or whatever, to try to at least make it look like you have some followers, or you think just organic and be consistent from the outset?
I think you could definitely focus on doing ads. One thing that I recommend to people is not to invite your friends and family to like your page, because although it may look good that you are getting likes and followers and everything, which is actually Facebook Facebook has that option for your page where you can like invite your friends to like it, but that's not something that you want to do because they aren't your target market. So it's good and all if people are liking your post and engaging with it, but if it's your aunt who's never going to purchase from you, then what's the point, if that makes sense? So you could definitely run some ads in order to get those likes and follows.
Yeah, I think it's funny that you mentioned that because I'm always amused when I get, someone who was my friend, Ashley, I'm a bit older than you. I'm almost 40. And so I've lived a lot of different places in my life. And I'll get people who are from it's almost like 4 or 5 lives ago for me who, I know they're a friend on Facebook, but they want me to like their local business page in some city where I haven't lived in over a decade. I just think it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, fine. And I just ignore them because I don't really I've already got too much in my feed anyway, but let's go back to the overall strategy. So I'm betting most entrepreneurs who are listening to this, they have engaged in some social media, but I'm betting they probably haven't ever thought about creating an overall strategy or thinking through developing an overall strategy. For those folks, what is your best advice about the first steps they need to take to start developing kind of a comprehensive social media strategy?
Yeah. So one thing that I recommend is really taking the time to sit down and kind of pretend that you're your target market. So think about that you're your ideal client. So what I always say is to kind of start out with a Word document, a blank Word document, and kind of do a brain purge when you're getting out all your thoughts onto a piece of paper. So you can write out what exactly you do and who you serve. You can write out all the qualities that your ideal client or customer has. You can write out your competitors and what they're doing. So you can kind of see how you can, compare to them on social media. You can write out content ideas. You can view your analytics to see where your most optimal times are and when your followers are on the most. You can write out kind of anything that you think would really help in terms of social media. So I always really, really focus on having a plan because I'm the type of person who needs to see something in front of me instead of just throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping it sticks. So I really, really recommend putting yourself in your target market shoes. And that may sound kind of cliche, but it works. And when you think about what exactly they would want to see, then that's when you have to kind of translate that into a strategy.
I think that's great advice. But so let me, again, since you're a planner and I am too, are there different kind of components that you think of or breakdowns about, I think part of it definitely is figuring out who your market is, but is there also thinking through frequency, where you're going to be, things like that? Do you need to think about those things up front?
Yeah. So with frequency, that kind of tends to come with a lot of trial and error. So it really depends on what kind of brand you are. Like, for example, news sites, they post probably at least 20 times a day on Facebook, but you don't want to be posting 20 times per day on Facebook. So that frequency kind of depends on a little bit of testing and seeing what works. But for example, I typically recommend 2 to 3 posts per Facebook page per day, maybe 6 to 10 tweets per day, 1 Instagram post per day. But frequency is definitely something that should be included, as well as what I mentioned, content categories. So that includes both curated content, which is content from other sources that may be experts in your field or other business owners who are kind of have something relative to what you do, and also content that you create yourself. So articles you write, videos you make, pictures you take. Those are 2 huge things that I always recommend to use. And also I recommend having a hashtag list, especially for Instagram. So doing a bunch of hashtag research to kind of figure out where your target market is, because targeted hashtags are super great for reaching your ideal client and customer. So that's one thing that I definitely recommend having on the strategy as well.
So now I want to kind of dive into the different areas that you're talking about and the different platforms. And since you were talking about Instagram, I want to focus there. And part of the reason I want to focus there, quite honestly, Ashley, is I have no idea what to do on Instagram. I'm a lawyer. I had this legal education business. And so, look, I get where Instagram fits in for people in fashion or in health and wellness or, in those types of things. But let's talk about, for example, I know you help people in finance. How does someone in finance use Instagram? What kind of pictures are they posting? What kinds of things should those businesses be posting on Instagram to build up and kind of get an engagement with their target market?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that I highly recommend to people, which tends to kind of work in pretty much every industry that's service-based, is answering common questions that your target market has. So maybe, for example, finance, I've worked with a few women in the finance industry, and one thing that they did was they talked about kind of questions that they always heard from their clients. So what maybe it was how to pay off debt, or how to save for retirement, or how to save to purchase a second home. They kept in mind all the questions that either potential clients or current clients asked them and wrote them down. And then they would make posts around it, and even blog posts, so even off of social media. But they could use pictures of themselves. They could use maybe like an infographic that they created. But the whole point is to create content that solves your target market's problem. Because not only are you giving them free advice, but you're also building that credibility and trust for yourself with your audience. And when people are making an investment, as I mentioned earlier, they only do business with people that they know, like, and trust. And that's exactly how you kind of build that credibility for yourself and therefore grow your client base.
Okay, so, and again, the way you described the purpose there and what you should be doing makes sense to me in a general sense, but I had always understood that Instagram is largely people scrolling through looking at pictures. You're saying people are actually taking the time to read the posts, or how are people going to find you to start with on Instagram if you're posting advice and, your pictures aren't going to be these beautiful, and I mean, maybe they are, but it's going to take some work to make a picture of, how to pay off your second mortgage maybe be engaging.
Yeah, so that kind of is where the infographic comes in. There's a few free or really low cost photo editing programs you can use, such as Canva, where you can make kind of these engaging text photos or quotes or anything like that, and just make sure it obviously has your branded colors and your logo and everything. So that can be really eye-catching. And a lot of people like to take photos of themselves because it's kind of real and raw. And that kind of breaks down the barrier that social media needs to be some huge, perfect show of your life. You're able to kind of show them a little bit behind the business owner and who you are. Those tend to work well. Even if you want to use stock photos, there's some great sites that have stock photos that don't necessarily look like they're stock photos. But people do tend to actually read the comments and the captions. And one thing that really helps is having an engaging opener. So one thing that I like to do is when I post tips about social media, I will write like an opener in literally like all caps. And it may be a little aggressive or kind of out there, but it really causes people to stop and read what exactly you're writing. So that's kind of how people are going to stop and read. And also people are finding you through hashtags. That kind of leads back to the point that hashtags are something super important to be including in your strategy. So you can make sure that people who are, for example, trying to hire a certified financial planner, they're able to find you through the hashtags that they're searching.
Okay. Well, so here's the other question I have for you. This maybe is a broad question. Is there anything left for that's personal for an entrepreneur these days? Because we've all heard it. And for example, Instagram, I think I couldn't figure out, maybe there is a way to do a page for your business, but it seemed to be personal. And Facebook, you're supposed to be authentic with your personal page, et cetera. I mean, is there any way that social media can remain personal and not part of your business in your view?
So one thing that I really focus on is kind of like the fact of showing behind the scenes. So like you said, kind of showing that personal side to you. So you can either show something that you're doing on the weekend or how you like to start your morning routine. I definitely recommend being personal and showing yourself who you are, as I mentioned, as a person outside of the business, because that really helps to make that connection. I definitely don't think that being super professional all the time is really necessary, but kind of showing who you are as a person, what you're like, will really help to, again, build that trust and allow people to work with you.
Yeah, I guess I have a different concern because I'm, like I said, I'm a bit older than you. And so when I first started using social media, it was largely I was using Facebook, and it was to keep in touch with people from my life, like friends, not business. And so I was never using it for business. And I only kind of broke down on that, I guess, within the other than pages. I had pages for my business, but my personal Bobby Klink page was just personal. I mean, that's where I talk to friends. And quite honestly, that's where I would say things about politics that now, I don't do that anymore because potential business partners are looking at it and I don't want to turn anyone off. And I guess that's what I was wondering is there a balance that you've found that can work for business owners where, maybe they can, have some social media where, they don't have to worry about turning off potential business partners?
Yes, absolutely. So one thing that works is I actually have separate accounts. So I'll have a personal Twitter account and a business one, personal Instagram account, and then a business Instagram account. And then with Facebook, it's actually against their terms of service to have two accounts. You can have multiple pages, but you're actually only allowed to have one account or else your other one will get shut down. So for my Facebook account, exactly like you mentioned, I talk to family and friends and everything. So I keep that personal and I don't request anyone to be Facebook friends or accept them unless I really know them. And that's kind of how I keep that boundary. And then therefore, just keeping things really separate between personal and professional and having separate accounts when possible tends to really help in keeping that fine line.
Yeah, and that's what I did originally. But like I said, as I started doing a lot more of kind of being out there and being first when I started appearing on podcasts and all these things, people will always try to friend me on Facebook. And for a long time, I just kind of ignored it. But now I think I've broken down and now I am friends with kind of business relationships on Facebook. So that was what I was wondering. And I like your strategy and I wish I could have kept it up, but sadly I haven't. But getting back to kind of the substantive advice for business, you mentioned, well, let's talk about Facebook for a minute, because I know there's a lot more than simply posting to a page, but you mentioned having 2 posts a day is typically kind of the sweet spot. Is that your general advice to folks?
Yes, definitely.
And so should, some of that be curated and some of it be original, and what's the mix there on Facebook in your view?
Yeah, definitely. So you may have heard of like the 80-20 rule where 80% of your content should be like other people's, so curated, and 20% should be your own content. But I actually have kind of tweaked that and I call it the 1/3 social media rule. And this actually applies to not only Facebook, but also Twitter. So basically it states that 1/3 of your content should be promotional. So that's whether it's promoting your products, your services, your articles, videos, anything that kind of has to do with you is considered promotional. The second third is content sharing. So that's curating all that content from relevant entrepreneurs and experts in your industry or even other industries, whether it's their own programs that they're running or their own articles, their own videos, anything that kind of has to do with other people falls into that category. And then lastly, the last third is engagement. So anything under that category I consider to be anything that people want to interact with. So it could be a question that you ask, a quote that you create. It can be a poll that you make, kind of anything that'll get that initial conversation going with your audience would fall under that.
So let me ask you, because I'd always heard the 80-20 and I like this 1/3 you're proposing, but it's always seemed strange to me that we are going to group, for example, sending people just to a blog post of ours that is not promotional, right? Where we're just giving free information and there's really nothing else in with promotional, but you would still count that within promotional because you're sending them and promoting your brand?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And how about if you do videos where you're, live videos where it's, say, a 15-minute video where you're just giving away content, but it's, you're talking. Is that promotional in your view or is that something else?
I would consider it promotional because when you're talking or giving away that free advice, you're still building up your brand, as you mentioned, and therefore kind of building up your credibility and trust with your audience. And when people realize that you actually know your stuff and are super knowledgeable in your industry, then down the line, if it's something that they do truly need help with, it's when they'll remember that video that you did or remember that blog post you put out and will then end up hiring you because of it.
Okay. Well, so that's good advice. And is that, in your view, the 1/3, does that apply across all of the different social media platforms?
I say it works best for Twitter and Facebook, but it's kind of hard to do content sharing on Instagram. Okay. So I typically tend to stick to promotional and engagement for Instagram.
Okay. Now, and I think you mentioned 6 to 10 posts on Twitter is the sweet spot a day?
Yes, anywhere from 6 to 10, or even you could do more than that, such as 15, because the half-life of a tweet is only about 30 minutes compared to Facebook and Instagram, and the posts live a little bit longer. So being super active on Twitter is kind of important with keeping up with your brand and engagement.
Yeah, and that's an interesting comment because you made that comment, and I agree. Twitter, especially me, I have a ton of followers and I follow a bunch of people, so my feed is always jam-packed. But on Facebook, you have an opposite problem or a different problem, which is organic reach is so low on Facebook. I mean, what can you do to kind of help that and get your reach higher without having to pay for ads on Facebook?
One thing I really stress is video. So you may have noticed that Facebook, if you do a Facebook Live, Facebook tends to get your people to see it and engage with it much more quickly than they would with just a regular post. And that's because Facebook is really kind of encouraging you to do live. So I recommend going live on Facebook, and then Facebook, kind of the order that they rank it for content of what they're going to control, how well it performs. It goes Facebook Live, then manually uploaded video. So that's a video that you record and then upload to Facebook itself. And then it goes a post with a photo and text, and then just a post that has text only. So because Facebook favors live and manually uploaded video the most, that's what I really push people to do when applicable. I know it's not always possible to do video all the time, but if you have the time to do it and the resources, I definitely recommend putting video out there to grow your page more quickly.
One problem when you raise the lives that I wanted to ask you, I don't know if you've run into this problem or any of your clients have. I ran into the problem because I started using, I think it's Ecamm Live to do my Facebook Live so that I could put some branding and things like that. But I seem to have a problem where the audio and video don't match. Is that a problem that you run into? And I'm just asking because it's something that drives me nuts.
Yeah, there's definitely been some situations where that's happened. I personally use only Facebook itself for live, but my clients have tend to use third parties like that so they can also get their branding. And then it turns out where it just gets all mumbled and it's not all the same.
Yeah. And the problem is, but even when I went to live, I think part of my problem was actually my internet connection where I was doing it from, because even when I went to live, if I use my external microphone, there would be a mismatch. Whereas if I use the webcam mic, it worked. But the problem is that means either I get good audio quality that doesn't match or I get bad audio quality that matches. So yeah. Any advice, if I have to choose between those two, do you have any advice for me which one I should pick?
I would say probably better audio, just so people can hear what you're saying. And then maybe they might not be looking at you to see if it's matching up, but I would definitely recommend better audio.
Okay. Well, and so then let me ask you, and again, while I've got you, I'm going to ask you this because I'm in the new year. We're recording this at the end of December or middle of December, I guess. And in the new year, I'm going to engage. I've got a new editorial calendar laid out where each week, my plan at least, is to have a blog post about a topic. Then I'm going to have a Facebook Live about that topic. That'll be probably 15, 20 minutes, maybe, depending on what it is. I'm also hopefully going to have kind of a free download that people can get about that topic. So if that's my plan, when I'm doing the Facebook Live, what should I put as kind of the text to go around it? Should it focus and relate to the blog post, which will then also have the freebie, or should it go to the freebie? In your view, which is the better approach for people who are making a choice like that?
I tend to say that you should probably focus on the blog post, because if you're kind of driving people to the blog post and they're able to read more about like you and the awesome advice that you provide and the tips that they can grab from you, and then they can be led to the freebie. Because one thing that unfortunately tends to happen is people see the freebie and they're like, oh, freebie, and then they get it, but they're not really interested in you and your brand, and therefore just subscribe to your email list just to get that free item. So if you're leading people to the blog post instead, then it's obviously a topic that they're interested in learning more about, and then they get put onto your email list after they see that freebie.
So you might get fewer people on your email list that way, but the quality of the people is likely to be higher. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Absolutely. Okay.
So I think that's great advice. And I think that I'm going to take it and I'm going to adopt it and I'm going to use that because you're the expert here. But so let me, I think, look, we've talked about a lot of different things here. What I want to ask at this point, well, actually, before I go to wrap up on Facebook, how important is it to engage in things like groups and those other pieces other than your page and your business page?
Extremely important.
And what role does that play, and how do you go about doing that? Give us some advice on that.
Yeah, definitely. So I recommend to my clients that they find at least 3 Facebook groups that contain their target market and join that group. And in that Facebook group, I recommend not selling yourself, but kind of providing that advice that we've been talking about, where you can give some free tips or share some of your experience or your knowledge or anything that you think the audience can benefit from. Definitely share it. And that in turn helps to build up your credibility. And there's one Facebook group that I'm pretty active in, and over the past, I'd say year, I was really focused on providing that solid advice and helping people in any way that I can rather than trying to sell myself. And in turn, most of my clients have ended up coming from that Facebook group. And it's just the fact that I've kind of built up my base there and showed that I'm able to kind of help people, because people really get turned off when you're just selling to them without building that relationship with them first. So when whatever Facebook groups that you join, really focus on seeing how you can serve people. And that will end up kind of, I guess, creating a bigger name for you and expanding that client base.
So that's great advice. And I think that's the approach I've taken in groups I'm in. I try to just give advice. But one question I think a lot of people have is, what's the best way to find groups? Is this just trial and error? I mean, I know I've tried to find a bunch and I get into a bunch and then I'm like, oh yeah, this is literally every single post in here is people trying to promote themselves. I'm out. But, how do people find a good group that's likely to be a place where they can kind of provide value and actually make some good connections with people?
Yeah. So one thing I tend to do is exactly what you said, which is trial and error, because you may see a group and just by looking at it, you might think that it's a good option for you, especially because it's kind of hard to really see if a group is good when they're like closed. Mm-hmm. So I recommend kind of doing that trial and error. And you can even search keywords in Facebook to see if any groups come up. So if depending on your industry, if you have specific keywords you want to look for, that tends to help with finding groups. But definitely the trial and error, joining groups, seeing which ones work for you and which ones don't, tends to work best. And also once you're in a group, on the sidebar, I believe it is, they have like suggested groups. So those tend to kind of hit the jackpot with me, where I'll be in a group and all of a sudden I'll see a few suggestions and then I'll try them out and then I end up really liking them.
Okay. Well, and so how often then should you plan to be in a group? Is that kind of, you should set a time every day that you go in and provide advice, or is it some other kind of frequency? What is your advice there?
So I actually have this like calendar for each month that I plan out. And each day I actually write out which Facebook group I'll be posting in and what topic I'll be posting on. So I'm kind of switching between a few different groups, because you don't want to be posting every single day because it can get a little bit exhaustive for you. So if you just kind of plan out, okay, so maybe Monday you'll post in this group about like this topic. And then Wednesday you'll post in another group, but perhaps about the same topic. Just kind of spreading it out. I recommend probably posting in groups 2 to 3 times per week for each group, just so you can kind of not stretch yourself so thin with that.
So that's the actual posting, but how about engaging? And again, I've found often that where I've been able to provide value and get connections is I see someone who asks a question in a group and then I respond and provide advice in the response. So is that just kind of when you're posting, you look for opportunities to do that, or do you schedule times for that into your schedule as well?
So I engage in groups every single day. I don't necessarily schedule a time, but kind of do when I have free time. So maybe it's when I wake up in the morning or when I'm relaxing at night or just even eating lunch. I'll kind of just take the time to scroll through some of my favorite groups and then just kind of either, you don't even necessarily have to engage in posts that are only related to you. Like if someone shares an accomplishment and you congratulate them, that's huge. And that's something that they'll end up remembering further down the line, that you congratulated them on the big goal that they hit. So just kind of engaging in your favorite groups tends to work best. Definitely every day. I recommend kind of sticking to anywhere from like 2 to 4 groups. That way you're not totally overwhelmed with being present in every single one.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think that's what I've tried to do. I can't claim to be as good as I think you would want me to be, but but you know, that's the life of a busy entrepreneur, but I love that advice. So now I want to kind of wrap up, but I want you to give a piece of advice. So if you could give entrepreneurs one piece of advice, and think in the terms of either something they could do in 5 minutes a day or something they could get done by the end of this week if they put their mind to it, you know, what piece of advice would you have for them to improve their social media presence or practice, you know, to start today and get some real improvement in a week?
So one thing that I recommend, which ends up working really well for some of the women that I work with, is just scheduling like maybe 30 minutes each day to writing content. So which is kind of like what you just said, which is taking 5 minutes each day. But maybe you find that you write best in the morning before you start your work, or at night, or even like an afternoon break. But schedule around 30 minutes each day to write content, whether it's social media or a blog post or an email, but just kind of getting into the habit of writing that content, and then maybe even scheduling it if you have the time will help you to really get into the process of writing content every single day. And therefore, you'll find that you have a much more solid and consistent social media presence.
There you go again with one of these habit goals that you're a big fan of, which I love. And I think it's So Ashley, it's been a pleasure, and thank you for all the great advice. Can you tell the listeners where they can get in touch with you if they want to hire you, want to connect with you, or want to buy something from you? Where should they go to find you?
Yeah, definitely. So my website is dashofsocial.com, and my handle on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram is dashofsocial.
That's great. And by the way, for listeners, you're going to hear more about this in kind of months to come. Ashley and I are both part of the Infopreneur Summit put on by Bailey Richard, who was my guest in episode 4. So you can also find information from her there, which I think will be a great session. Haven't seen it yet, but I expect it's going to be wonderful content there as well. Ashley, thank you for being on the show. It has been great.
Thanks so much for having me, Bobby.
Okay, now listeners, stick around. I will have a quick legal lesson after the break where I'll give you some advice on some legal issues that can come up in social media and how to protect yourself as you're doing the wonderful business building based on Ashley's advice.
And now for today's legal lesson.
Yeah!
Hey, Ashley really is pretty fantastic, isn't she? The advice that she gave you on how to build your social media and how to put together an overall strategy and do it organically and how to build a following of engaged people who are likely to actually be potential buyers and the important people for your business was fantastic. I loved hearing it. I also love her story. Let's be honest, anyone who really kind of starts a business of online entrepreneurship when they're in high school is pretty impressive to me. And I wasn't just being nice to her when I said I was impressed with that, because in high school, I was not thinking anything so grand. So it was pretty fantastic. There were some great nuggets there. I hope you will kind of take in what she said and apply the lessons. And in this week's legal lesson, I'm going to address some issues about social media. Now, this is our second episode where we really talk a lot about social media. In episode 3, I interviewed Madeline Sklar, who gave a lot of great advice about Twitter. She is kind of a Twitter person who knows just about everything there is to know about Twitter and gives great advice there. And in the legal lesson there, I talked about publicity rights. But I'm going to talk about something different in today's legal lesson that also applies to social media. But I want to back up and start from the concept that you need to think about the fact that in social media, pretty much all of the legal landmines that you could step on as part of your business can come up. Because social media is such a broad area that you're going to be doing so many different things that you really do need to take the time to make sure that you're doing it right. Now, there's a couple of pieces of quick advice I can give for you there. Number one, make sure you read the terms of service for each of the social media sites. I know who wants to do that. That doesn't sound like a lot of fun, but there's some valuable information there. It'll talk about what's allowed, what's not allowed, and it'll give you pretty good footing. So, one thing that a lot of people had never thought of or would never have thought of. In Facebook's terms of service, for example, it says, hey, you can't go and tag people just for the sake of getting in front of their audience. Now, that goes back to publicity rights and the issue we had addressed with Madeline. But the point is, if you read those terms of service, I know that doesn't sound like fun, but it will give you a good basis to make sure you're doing things right. Now, on top of that, I have a quick checklist you can download that addresses the issues you need to think about. So the do's and the don'ts of social media from a legal perspective. You can get your hands on that by going to socialmedia.youronlinegenius.com/opt-in. Again, that's socialmedia.youronlinegenius.com/opt-in. Now, in the lesson today, though, what we're going to talk about is, again, an issue that doesn't just apply to social media, but it applies pretty significantly there. And that is making sure that you are not stepping on someone else's copyrighted material in social media. Now, this is an issue that comes up because in social media, you're going to be sharing content. And so you have to think through what are the implications of that. Now, let me step back. Copyright is an area of law that protects any kind of creative work. So images, so pictures, for example, music, movies, written work, all of that is protected under copyright law. And what copyright law says is that whoever owns the copyright has the exclusive right to distribute, copy, etc., all this different information. So that's what prevents you from, taking a song that you bought a CD of and distributing it on the internet. That was the Napster problem and all those other issues. And now in the context of social media, there's a couple of things that come up. First is images. You have to be careful about sharing images. So where do you get your images that you will share on social media? You need to make sure that you have a license to use them and to use them in social media. So that's rule number one. Make sure that you're not just going, for example, to Google Images, doing a right-click save as, and then, putting that on social media. You can't do that. You have to only use images that you have the right to use. The second issue, though, is kind of a corollary of that is just because someone has put an image on social media doesn't mean that you can then copy that image from social media and use it somewhere else. So you have to be careful about that. Now, let me back up, though, and give you, this is where we come back to the importance of reading the terms of service of each one of the social media platforms. Because each one of the social media platforms will have something in there that says when you post something on that platform, you are giving the platform and other users a license to use that material consistent with the terms of service. So what does that mean? Well, it means that you can't be in trouble for retweeting a tweet that someone else has put up because you have their permission to do it. Similarly, and this is a context that comes up frequently, on YouTube, if someone has put a video up on YouTube, so long as you follow YouTube's terms of service, including using an embedded player on your own website, you can do that because the terms of service give you the permission to do that. But the important point here is you need to be careful about using other people's content, whether it's written work, an image, a movie, a music, etc. So in the context, Twitter is an easy one, but let's talk about a different area. So Facebook Live, one of the examples I always point out to people that they don't realize is when you shoot a live video, you can't play any music in the background or even prominently. So for example, if I'm shooting a video, in the next room, my assistant or associate or someone else who works for me or works with me has the radio playing and it's got copyrighted music and that comes onto my video, guess what? I've infringed a copyright. So when you put anything on any social media platform, you need to be hyper vigilant about making sure that you're not including anyone else's copyrighted material. So again, that means an image. Don't use an image that you don't have the rights to use. That means music. Don't use any of your own music on Facebook Live, YouTube, or anywhere else. If you want to put music, you have to get music that you have a license for. The same is going to apply for taking large chunks of someone else's written work. You can't do that and pass it off as your own. So that's the essential lesson here is don't use someone else's content on social media without their permission. Now, again, that's having to do with copyright infringement. That's the place where a lot of people get in trouble on social media. That's where you'll get your account shut down, etc. So you need to be careful about not doing that. I'm not going to belabor the point. The bigger point and the more important and more valuable lesson for you is to make sure that you're aware of what's allowed and what's not allowed. And sadly, the way to do that is to go through the terms of service. And look, I can read them pretty quickly because they're written for a lawyer to understand. What I would suggest to you is you're going to have to put a little bit of time into it, but it's worth it. And once you do it once, you'll understand what's allowed and what's not allowed. And, they change it from time to time, but it won't be something you have to do all the time. But I recommend you do that. Also, get your hands on the social media checklist, which I mentioned is at socialmedia.youronlinegenius.com/opt-in. You do that, it has a quick checklist so you'll know what you need to do and not do. And then, if you have a question, you can kind of figure it out from there, but you'll at least know the high points of what you need to be doing and avoiding. That's it for this legal lesson. That's it for this week's episode of the Online Genius Podcast. Again, we'll come back to you next week with another great interview, another great legal lesson to help you build, protect, and sell your expertise online. Until next time, this is Bobby Klink signing off.
Thanks for listening. And remember to visit mistakes.youronlinegenius.com to get your essential guide to the 4 legal mistakes that can doom your business and how to avoid them. Join us next week for another episode to expand your online genius and your success.